What if what we call public opinion was just a manufactured narrative that makes it easier to convince people that if their views are different, then there's something wrong with that, or there's something wrong with them?
Spending is a tax. As soon as the government spends money, eventually it's a tax. Sometimes we put a direct tax on the people, sometimes we borrow the money, and sometimes we print the money.
Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth.
The Patrick Riggins Show. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
Yeah, some good old gravity kills to start off the last show of 2013. You're listening to one of the top, fastest growing shows on the radio today, the Patrick Riggins Show. And we're on one of the fastest growing and most active radio networks, the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network, providing a welcome beacon of light, a bright ray of freedom to all those lost ships at sea, a sure passage to the bay of personal liberty in an ocean fraught with rocks and reefs of government intrusion and control. We're broadcasting here from our home radio station in scenic and beautiful Knoxville, Tennessee, located in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. The radio station to which I'm referring is, of course, none other than News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Starting off the show, we put this story on Facebook this week, and I promised I'd talk about it. If you aren't hip to our Facebook page, it's located at facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. That's facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. You don't have to be a member of Facebook to view it either. Just type in that web address and you'll be able to read everything we post along with the links to the stories. This week, though, we had a judge rule that, hey, all this NSA spying is in fact constitutional and very much needed. This is the story from the CNN website. It ran on just about all the news websites, but that's the one I happened to grab.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. I have to admit it. It did surprise me a little bit, though it wasn't totally unexpected. I knew after the ruling against the NSA last week, and we'd probably have another judge that would rule in favor, if anything, just to force the issue to the Supreme Court. The story is a federal judge in New York ruled the NSA's bulk collection of data on nearly every phone call made in the United States was legal. In his ruling Friday, U.S. District Judge William Pauley said the NSA's bulk collection of phone records under Section 215 of the Patriot Act was legal. Quote, but the question of whether that program should be conducted is for the other two coordinate branches of government to decide, unquote, said the ruling by Pauley, an appointee of President Bill Clinton. So spying on the government in direct violation of the Constitution is legal. Clearly, this is a judge who has no respect for that document. If the government is doing something that isn't listed in the Constitution as being permitted to do, then it isn't constitutional, and thus isn't legal. I don't care what little legal nuances you want to cram this NSA spying program through. It simply isn't mentioned in the Constitution as a power of the federal government. All this legal wrangling is jumping around the fact that we agree that the federal government is going to be bound by the Constitution. If it isn't, then why in the world do we bother even having that document? The American Civil Liberties Union, which brought the case, said it would appeal Pauley's ruling. Their quote is, "We are extremely disappointed with this decision, which misinterprets the relevant statutes, understates the privacy implications of the government surveillance, and misapplies a narrow and outdated precedent to read away core constitutional protections." That's Jamil Jaffer, the ACLU's deputy legal director. Last week, U.S. District Judge Richard Leon said the NSA's bulk collection of metadata, phone records of the time and numbers called without any disclosure of content, that apparently violates privacy rights. His preliminary ruling favored 5 plaintiffs challenging the practice, but Leon limited the decision only to their cases. So only these 5 plaintiffs are having their constitutional rights violated? Now, I know, the case only involves them. But what's happened to our media? Where are they while all this is occurring? They should be roasting all these congressional representatives that voted for all this spying over a fire by now. A quote from Judge Leon, "I can't imagine a more indiscriminate and arbitrary invasion than this systematic and high-tech collection and retention of personal data on virtually every citizen for the purposes of querying and analyzing it without prior judicial approval." That was Judge Leon, an appointee of President George W. Bush. He also said, surely such a program infringes on, quote, that degree of privacy that the founders enshrined in the Fourth Amendment. We talked about this last week, but I'll briefly summarize for those who weren't in attention, or paying attention, or in attendance. Judge Leon's ruling said the plaintiffs in this case have also shown a strong likelihood of success on the merits of a Fourth Amendment claim, adding, as such, they too have adequately demonstrated irreparable injury. Leon also noted the government, quote, does not cite a single instance in which analysis of the NSA's bulk metadata collection actually stopped an imminent attack or otherwise aided the government in achieving any objective that was time-sensitive in nature. However, he put off enforcing his order, barring the government from collecting the information, pending an appeal by the government. So when an activity is found to be probably unconstitutional, the judge ruling, and that's what he found last week, that Judge Leon ruling issues a stay in order to give the government time to appeal. Not cease and desist collecting this metadata, and then later if it's found constitutional, well, then it can continue. If something is probably violating the Constitution, and thus harm is being done in this judge's opinion, then shouldn't that activity be stopped until it can be found out whether or not it's legal? When this latest judge made this ruling, Judge Pauley this week, saying this spying was constitutional, I didn't see him going the other way and saying, well, I don't think it's unconstitutional, so I'm going to rule in favor of the government, but I'm going to direct the government to stop spying until the plaintiffs get a chance to appeal. No, you see, the government always gets a pass. The government never has to do with less. It's always us, the citizens, the people in charge. And in case you've forgotten, we're the ones in charge of this country, not the government. It's about time we start acting like owners of this country instead of meek little serfs begging for scraps of freedom from our master's table. Here's something I want you to remember through all of this. Despite what you were taught in school, the Supreme Court is not the final arbiter of what's constitutional or not. The people of this country are. We decide what's constitutional or not. If you want to listen to a whole segment on that, go back to our YouTube archives at youtube.com/Patrick Riggin Show. Go back to the October 5th, 2013 show, October 5th, 2013, and look for the segment. It's entitled, Who Determines What's Constitutional? It was the third segment of the show that week, but just look for that title. You'll see it right off when you get to that show, October 5th of this year. The whole segment has some good information, but I'll pull a quote from Thomas Jefferson that I used during that part of the show. Mr. Jefferson stated, quote, to consider the judges as ultimate arbiters of the constitutional questions is a very dangerous doctrine indeed. Now, he also wrote, but the opinion which gives the judges to the right to decide what laws are constitutional and what not only for themselves in their own sphere of action, but for the legislature and executive also in their spheres, would make a judiciary a despotic branch. What he's saying is that putting the Supreme Court at the top of the hierarchy for determining what is constitutional or not would, in essence, make the Supreme Court a dictator, a ruler over the people of this nation, which the Constitution doesn't allow. You've probably never been told this either, other than on this show. The Constitution does not say the Supreme Court is the final say on what is constitutional or not. And do you know why it doesn't? because the citizens of this country are the final say. We created the government. We are over it. We are the boss. Therefore, since we're ultimately in charge, then we ultimately have the final say on what is constitutional and what isn't. Remember, all the powers not mentioned in the Constitution are reserved to the states and ultimately to the people. It's time for our first break of this much too short hour. This week, we'll get into the government's revolving door. We'll talk about just how advanced America really is and how not to end sentences with a preposition and a whole lot more here on the Patrick Riggins Show and the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network.